Good afternoon and welcome to our OBS Session 7 Online Bible Study. Let's go over to our lesson. How can we understand the Bible? This is now the second part of the series on how can we understand the Bible. Growing up, I have read a lot of things that I didn't understand, like the things that will be shown here. So probably you have the same. But be that as it may, I just want for you to think back, how did you struggle on these things? And we will be using that later in our studies. Okay? So, before anything else, as we study this, how can we understand the Bible? I need to make a disclaimer first. I believe it is but just proper and ethical thing to do, and to give credit to whom credit is due. Let me just tell you this, that most of the materials being used in this video or in this OBS are not mine. How I wish I could give you the resources, but I'm not taking the credit for it. Thank you so much for the kind words that you've been giving, you've been posting, you've been commenting, but most of the materials are not mine. They're learned from studies, either formal or informal. I learned it in school, whether when I was attending school or when I was teaching. So some of the materials also I learned when I talk with my professors and my teachers, or those who are in authority, person or people in authority in their own fields, in informal gatherings, in chit chats. So I learned some of these things. I learned also from other presenters, and maybe some of them I have borrowed, but definitely not the slides. I did those slides. So I could not give, for so many presenters, I could not give their names, but I borrowed some from them. Some of which I also read from books that I can't remember the authors. Okay? Last but not least, I learned it from the School of Hard Knocks. There are things that I learned from experience, things that I have learned from daily life. I've been teaching for so long that some of the things that I used to believe and I used to hold dear has become, as I grow old, are not that practical after all. So let us just focus on these things and let us just deal with those things as we study how can we understand the Bible. Okay, these are but just practical lessons that we'll be dealing today. Okay, last week we studied about context, and in context we said it is the circumstances that form the setting for an event or statement or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. So we studied contextual thinking. We studied things that you need to be thinking of whenever you are reading a particular passage. So we'll take these things. To carefully examine the context of a given passage, one needs to ask the following. First and foremost, what is the subject being discussed? So we need to be specific on that. Taking a verse out of context is a pretext. So we need to be looking at that. What is the subject? The second one will be very practical also. What is being said before the verse that is being studied? What triggered for that particular verse to be in that pericope? Okay? The third one is, what is being said after the verse being studied. Most often than not, you can find clues and answers in the following or preceding verses. The fourth one is, you need to ask, why did the inspired author write these verses or these things in this section of his book? Look at the bigger picture. When you look at particular verse, it's just this. But when you read the verses prior and the verses after, then you will get the bigger picture. And we would like to know the bigger picture. We would like to see the bigger picture. Nota bien is that never open a book, pick out the sentence in the book, and place a meaning on it without examining the sentences before and after. So those are but just practical ways in context, in contextual thinking, and we'll be applying those principles, those practical ways later. The second one is know the background. Background of what? Background of the verse you're studying. Know the background of the book. Who is this inspired author? Who is the writer, to be exact? And then the next one, who were the addressees or the recipients? To whom was it written to? Okay. The third one is, who are the people, individuals, or groups mentioned in the texts? You need to be asking, who are these persons the author is writing about? Okay. The fourth one is, when was it written? What time was it written? What is the situation at the time of writing? There are instances that sometimes when we read the scriptures, we put our culture, the present culture, to their culture. And we cannot understand what it means if we put our culture to their setting then. Okay, we will be studying more on this. The next one is, what kind of writing is it? Is it poetry? Biography? Is it just parable? A narrative? Prophecy? Etc. And the last part will be, 6 or 7 will be, who was it written? What was the condition of the place? Political condition, economic condition, things like that. That adds up to the nuance of the situation or even the event that just transpired. Last but not least, what is the theme or the purpose of the book? Oftentimes, writers, when they write, just like ours, is the prevailing and pervading principle of our OBS, is that reading the Bible for all it's worth. When a writer writes, he has that in mind, the purpose or the theme, and that will be the prevailing and pervading principle in all of the book, or in all of the epistle, or in all of the things that he's writing. Okay? Last but not least is use your uncommon common sense. It's just common sense. But nowadays, it seems like common sense is so hard. So use the uncommon common sense, which is 1. Do not rely heavily on dictionary for word meaning. See, meaning changes, or word meaning changes. So do not rely on that. Say again, when you read, do not deal so much on just the primary or secondary meaning. Okay? The next one will be, do not limit the study of the meaning of a word by using Greek lexicons. Oftentimes those who are coming from theological schools uses Greek lexicons. Sometimes it gives us a little bit of the feeling of credibility when we quote in Greek or when we use Greek terms. Do not get hung up into that, okay? Do not seek commentary for the meaning of the passage. Do not. Struggle with it first. Think about it. think about these practical things that we have. Don't go over to a dictionary immediately. Once you have made up your mind and made up your conclusion or made up your understanding on a particular passage, then look, then go and find out what they are saying about this, so that you will not have a colored glass in reading a particular verse or particular topic. Next one is, do not limit your study using one version only. There are some people that are hung up with particular verse or particular version. They insist as if God speak thus, or this is what it says. So don't get hung up to that, because some versions have their strengths and weaknesses. Much more so, please don't use versions that is translated by just one person or by one denomination. When we were in school, we were asked to read 10 different versions. And it was hard then because there were no apps available. So we really have to scramble and look for a particular verse and compare all of those versions. When you read at least 5, but we were required to use at least 10 in one of my classes. Okay? The next one is, avoid accepting as gospel truth the views of older people or people in authority. They may be just parroting some other person's learning and without even studying what they're saying. So don't, avoid that. Don't even take my words for it. Search it, look for it, read it. Last but not least, do not approach the scriptures to prove your prejudices, prejudgment, or do not approach the scriptures when your mind is already made up, or you want to prove something and you go looking for verses just to prove your point. Don't do that. Read the scripture as is. Okay? So let's go over how can we understand the Bible using the principles that we just studied. Okay? Applying those principles and using those principles, the principle of context, background, and uncommon common sense, we will be applying this in the shortest verse in English Bible, which is John 11:35. So if we put these things in John 11:35, we go over to context. It says, what is the subject being discussed? And we know that John 11:35 is that Jesus wept, okay, or Jesus cried. Some other version says Jesus burst into tears. If you be hung up with a particular version and you just insist that Jesus wept, as if Jesus just shed tears and cried silently, then you must be wrong, because some other versions, just like the Tagalog, sa Tagalog po kasi ang sabi niya, tumangis si Jesus. Ang pagtangis, hindi yun impit na pag-iyak. Ang pagtangis, hindi yun pasimpleng iyak. Ang pagtangis ay malakas na pag-iyak. Kaya pwede mong Englishin yon, Jesus wailed. Hindi lang Jesus wept. Jesus wailed. Jesus cried. And He cried out loud. Jesus burst into tears. At ang pag-iyak niya talaga nakita ng lahat-lahat. So, kung hindi natin alam ang background ng iba, kung hindi mo alam yung sinasabi ng ibang mga versions, at mahang up ka lang doon sa version mo nagsasabing Jesus wept, then you might be thinking na tumulo lang sa kabilang, sa mga pisngi ng Panginoong Jesus ang kanyang luha. But that's not seems to be the case. Okay, tuloy natin. What is being said before the verse that we're studying? What is being said before Jesus wept? What happened? What transpired before Jesus wept? Using, again, the contextual thinking, we go over to verses 34 and 33. In 33 it says, first, I did not include here because it is a little bit far, yung kay Martha. In verse 33 it says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. So, what made Jesus cry? He saw Mary crying. What made Jesus burst into tears? He saw the Jews, the mourners, relatives, friends crying along with Mary. What makes Jesus wept? Because first and foremost, Martha was crying when Martha came to him. So, with this, these are the verses that we saw prior to verse 35. How about after? What is being said after the verse? After Jesus wept, what follows to that? Look at these verses. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. See how he loved him. And then the next verse, then they said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? Just look at the highlight. Could he have kept this man from dying? That is indirectly the question that is being asked. Have he been here? Could he have saved Lazarus from dying? So, by using these practical principles, we've seen. And then the last one is that, why did the inspired author write these verses in this section of the scriptures? Last week we studied it. And we've seen that so that the disciples may believe, that is verse 15. So that Martha may believe, that is in verse 27. So that the Jews may believe, that is in verse 42. So that, again, that you and me and all of us may believe. Why? Because it is the pervading and prevailing principle of the book, the purpose of John in writing his gospel. And when we read, it says, John 20:30, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Done. Contextual thinking. Okay? If you have any questions, PM me. So, using John 11:35 and contextually going all over through chapter 11 of John, we've seen this and we could easily apply. Now we know why Jesus wept. Okay? The next one, application of the principles also that we learned is just going back. Now let's go over to the background check. When you read that particular book, it was written by John, so you ask, who is the inspired author? And then by looking at it and by knowing who is the inspired author, then you will come to know him a little bit more, okay? The inspired author of John 11:35 is, he calls himself John the Beloved. If you use King James, John the Beloved. Or in some other versions, he is being called the disciple whom Jesus loved. And it is in verse 13:23, in 19:26, 20 verse 2, 21 verse 7, 21 verse 20, and 21 verse 24. So if you want to know who wrote the Gospel of John, that's him, John the Beloved. He could probably be the youngest among the apostles. Bible scholars believe that he was just probably 25 when he joined the disciples. He was a disciple of John before he became a disciple of Jesus. Second one, who are the addressee or the recipients? With this, John seemed to be generic in his approach. He seemed to be writing to all of us, to general public. He seemed to be writing to reader of all races and of all ages. Why? Because of the prevailing and pervading purpose or theme of his book. Look at this. Again, let's use 2031. These are written so that you may believe, whatever be your timeline, your time frame, whatever age you're in. These are written. Everything that Jesus has done were written in John, that you and I may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing in Him, we may have life in His name. Okay? The next one is, who are the people or who are the individuals or groups mentioned in the texts? And we've seen that the three siblings were there: Martha, Mary, Lazarus. The disciples were also there. Okay, we've seen also that Thomas, among all the disciples, we thought Thomas to be the doubting Thomas, but in here, he was filled with faith when he said, "Let us go with him, and we'll die also with him." The next one that we have seen is that there are these Jews who were weeping, consoling, who were comforting the grieving sisters. Okay? And we've learned also that there are these particular Jews who are trying to stone Jesus. Okay? The next one. When was it written? The date given, 60 to 90 AD, is a little bit too wide. Okay? But most would say it is about in the 90s. Be that as it may, what were the conditions during those times? What were the conditions during the writing? Verse number 5. What is the situation at the time of writing? There is this kind of belief that is slowly creeping in to Christianity. The belief that is denying or diminishing the incarnation. The belief that is slowly saying God is so pure and man is sinful, therefore God could not become man. God could not dwell in a sinner's body. There was a debate on that. So those were the circumstances going on. There was also this question whether, that disciple, that apostle that denied Jesus, was he ever restored? That's why to this, I believe that the last chapter of John was inserted there just to show the readers that indeed Peter was reinstalled or was again given Jesus that assurance that he is still part of the disciples. Okay? At the time of the event, what we have seen so far at the time why Jesus wept, in verse 8, it says, Jews were seeking to stone Jesus. The disciples told him, the Jews were trying to kill you and you will be going there. So we know that the situation at the time of the death of Lazarus is that plenty of the Jews were trying ways, seeking ways to stone Jesus. Okay? So, what kind of writing is it? Is it poetry, biography, parable, narrative, or prophecy? It's just a gospel. Godspeed or Evangelion is just good news. the event was a narrative. The event was just a story about Lazarus being raised to life again. It's just a story about friendship, a story about how we can even tell the Messiah, the Savior, our inner feelings, our hurts, the things that we have, that oftentimes we thought of, oh, we don't dare to say this to the Savior. Huwag na lang nating sabihin, nakakahiya. But with John, nakita natin that yung sama ng loob ni Maria, yung sama ng loob ni Martha, nasabi niya, Lord, kung andito ka sana, hindi sana namatay si Bunso. Lord, kung dumating ka sana sa takdang panahon, just like you and me, kung may mga pinagdadaanan tayo, as if napakalayo ng Panginoon, as if gusto nating sumigaw, gusto nating iparating sa Kanya, natatakot tayo dahil baka maging blasphemous. Pero with these things, with this particular narrative, nakita natin, Jesus took it. The truth is, lalo niyang naintindihan kung gaano kamahal na magkapatid si Bunso. Lalo niyang naintindihan kung gaano kamahal ng ibang tao si Lazarus. Kaya nga, he was moved. Kaya nga siya naiyak. Having said that, sa mga babasahin niyo ulit, sa mga susunod na mga pag-aaral natin, sa mga pag-aaral ninyo sa salita ng Diyos, sana magamit ito. More often than not, ang paliwanag ay nasa kasunod ng mga bersikulo. Kung medyo nalilito ka, medyo malalim, medyo mahirap ang mga bagay-bagay na nakikita mo sa bersikulong pinag-aaralan mo ngayon, basahin mo yung nasa ibabaw, and then basahin mo yung nasa ilalim. More often than not, ang paliwanag ay nandoon. Andoon lang. Because God will not be telling us na hindi mo maintindihan. One thing more, and let me just add with this. Wala sa ibang mga passages ang paliwanag. Have you ever been to a meeting or to a worship service kung saan yung nag-preach, yung nasa harap, hindi pa niya tapos yung isang verse, naka-flip na naman siya sa kabilang verse, hindi pa siya tapos sa kabilang verse, naghanap ka pala ng verse, nasa kabilang verse na naman. Para bang ang paliwanag nito, nandoon, ang paliwanag noon, nandito, ang paliwanag dito, nandoon, naging jumping horse. Nagmumukha siyang magaling, pero nagmumukha tayong mahihirapang mag-aral sa salita ng Diyos. Isa din sa mga gumawa, nag-create. Isa din sa mga nagbigay sa atin ng hindi tamang pagkakaunawa at takot na magbasa ng Biblia because of those examples that we've seen. Preachers jumping from one passage after the other. Preachers connecting one passage to the other. Which is not practical. Hindi po tama. Kasi kung lahat natin noon, kung Matthew lang hawak mo, Mark lang, John lang, hindi mo pwedeng paghalu-haluin kasi nga nabuo ang New Testament noong 300 plus. Magfu-400 na, magfu-4th century na. Kaya huwag sabihin ng sino man na magaling na mangangaral o magaling na preacher na mula dito ang paliwanag ng isang verse na to, andi dito sa kabilang katuloy at mula dito kandi dito sa kabilang katuloy. Hindi po. Because when they were thinking or when they had this during the first century, unang-una, oral, word of mouth, naririnig lang nila. When it was written, hindi sabay-sabay na lumabas yung synoptic gospels. Hindi nauna si Lucas, nauna si Marcos, nung kay Marcos, and then dumagdag si Lucas, and then si Matthew. Pero hindi lahat-lahat, mayroong Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. John came in 90 na, mga around 90 na talaga itong aklat ni John. So we need to be thinking of contexts. Huwag iisipin, and don't you ever think that the explanation for a particular passage is not in the preceding or in the succeeding verses. And you will be looking at then I'll let you go. And if ever you've got questions, pagpatuloy po natin ang pag-aaral nito next week. Where was it written? It was written in Ephesus. Marami nagsasabi it must have been written in the island of Patmos kasi itinapon si John doon ni Domitian during the persecution. At doon nga natapon, doon nga niya isinulat ang kanyang revelation. Pero I believe that the Gospel of John was written while John was still ang tinatawag nilang Bishop of Ephesus, or was still the church leader in Ephesus, alongside dun sa 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, dun sa mga general epistles pa na ginawa ni Apostle John. Okay? Again, last but not least, and I'll end with this. What is the theme or purpose of the book? Prevailing talaga yan at saka prevailing. When in doubt, you go back to this. And this is what is written. These are written so that you may believe whatever time you're reading. Either you be reading it during the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, 14th century, or 19th, or even in our century, 21st century. These are written that you and I may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing in Him, we may have life through His name. Magandang hapon po. Ito po muli ang inyong kapatid, Ronnie Cariaga. And thank you so much for being with me. I'll be seeing you around.